Take that rifle away from her. I don't care what her file says. I will not put 12 lives in the hands of somebody who looks like she belongs behind a desk. Captain Ryan Mitchell slammed his hand on the table so hard the coffee cups jumped, and every soldier in that briefing room froze. Sergeant Emily Carter didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply looked at the man who had just tried to strip away the one thing she had earned through blood discipline and years of silence, and she said nothing at all, because she already knew something he didn't. Before we go any further, if you believe that real strength doesn't always shout, that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding everything together, then do this old friend a favor. Subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because this story only gets more powerful. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from right now, so I can see just how far Emily's story has traveled across this great country of ours. Now let's begin. The mountain wind was already biting when Sergeant Emily Carter stepped off the transport truck at Fort Raven Ridge. She was 30 years old, though the calm in her eyes made her seem older the way a person seems older after they have learned to stop expecting the world to be fair. She carried her own bag. She always carried her own bag, and when a young private offered to help, she thanked him with a small nod and kept walking. The men at the outpost watched her cross the yard the way men watch anything that doesn't fit the picture in their heads. She was not loud. She was not big. She did not swagger or crack jokes or slap backs to make friends. She walked like someone who had counted her steps 1,000 times before, and Fort Raven Ridge decided within about 4 minutes that they had her figured out. They were wrong. They just didn't know it yet. "That's her," one soldier muttered near the mess hall. "The marksman they've been talking about, that's what the paperwork says." Huh, thought she'd be bigger. Emily heard every word. She had spent her whole career hearing words like that drifting behind her back like smoke. She had learned long ago that she had two choices. She could spend her energy correcting people who had already made up their minds, or she could spend it getting ready for the moment those same people would need her. She had always chosen the second one, but it was quieter, it was lonelier, but it was the only choice that had ever kept anyone alive. Inside the command building, the air was warm and stale, thick with the smell of burnt coffee and old paper. Captain Ryan Mitchell was already waiting, standing at the head of a long table with his arms crossed, and the moment Emily walked in, she felt it. That familiar weight, that look. She had seen it on a dozen officers before him, that flicker of doubt that starts in the eyes and hardens into a decision before a single word is spoken. "Sergeant Carter," Mitchell said. It was not a greeting, it was a test. "Captain," she answered, "you come highly recommended." He said the word recommended the way another man might say the word rumored. Sniper school, top of your class, a stack of qualifications longer than my arm. He let a pause hang in the air. "On paper." "On paper," Emily repeated calm. "You understand my problem, Sergeant." Mitchell walked slowly around the table and the other officers in the room shifted, sensing the temperature drop. "Paper doesn't bleed. Paper doesn't panic when the shooting starts. I've buried good men who look perfect on paper. So forgive me if I don't hand out my trust just because somebody in an office 300 miles away signed off on you." "I'm not asking for your trust, sir," Emily said. "I'm asking to do my job." That answer landed harder than she meant it to. Mitchell's jaw tightened. A younger lieutenant near the wall almost smiled and then thought better of it. In the corner of the room, an older man watched the whole exchange without saying anything, a senior sergeant with gray coming in at his temples and a stillness about him that reminded Emily strangely of herself. That was Marcus Reed, though she didn't know his name yet. She only knew that he was the one man in the room who wasn't looking at her like she was a problem to be managed. "Let me be clear about how things run at Raven Ridge," Mitchell continued. "We are the last line before Black Canyon Valley. That valley has swallowed patrols before. Out here, I don't have room for people who need to be believed in. I need people who perform, every single time. No exceptions, no excuses." "Understood, sir." "Do you? Because I've read your file, Sergeant, and I keep seeing the same word over and over. Careful, methodical, patient." He said each word like it was a small insult. "You know what I don't see? Aggressive, decisive, warrior. Out here, the careful ones hesitate, and the ones who hesitate get people killed." Something flickered across Emily's face then just for a half second, and it wasn't anger. It was almost pity, because she had heard men say things exactly like that right up until the moment when careful was the only thing standing between them and a body bag. But she didn't say that. She never said the thing that would win the argument and lose the room. May I speak freely, Captain? Mitchell gestured with 2 fingers. By all means. Careful isn't the opposite of decisive, she said quietly. Careful is what lets you be decisive when it actually matters. The shot doesn't come from courage, sir. Courage just gets you to the trigger. The shot comes from every boring, careful hour nobody ever sees. For a moment, nobody spoke. Marcus Reed in the corner let out a slow breath that was almost respect. Mitchell just stared at her, and Emily watched him decide right there that he disliked her even more for being articulate about it. We'll see, was all he said. The first days at Raven Ridge passed the way she expected. She was assigned a bunk apart from the others, given the worst rotation handed the tasks nobody wanted. She did every one of them without complaint. When the men ran drills, she was the last one they picked and the first one they mocked. When she asked for access to the recent satellite imagery of the region, the request sat on someone's desk for 3 days before it was granted, and even then only because Marcus Reed quietly pushed it through. You didn't have to do that, Emily told him when she found out. Reed shrugged. He had a way of shrugging that carried more meaning than most men's speeches. Watched a lot of soldiers come through here, Sergeant. Loud ones, quiet ones. Learned a long time ago the quiet ones scare me a whole lot more. He nodded at the stack of images she was carrying. You're not sleeping much. Not really. Studying that valley. Every inch of it. Reed studied her for a moment. Mitchell thinks you're trying to prove something. I'm not trying to prove anything, Emily said. I'm trying to make sure that when something goes wrong out there, and it will, I already know the answer before anyone has to ask the question. Reed nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. The captain's not a bad man, he said. He's a scared man wearing a brave man's uniform. Lost people. It changed him, made him think doubt is the same thing as being careful. It's not. No, Emily agreed softly, it's not. What none of them understood, not Mitchell, not the men who mocked her, was what Emily actually did in those long hours alone. She wasn't sulking. She wasn't licking her wounds. She was working. Night after night, she laid the satellite images across her bunk and she read the land the way other people read a book. She traced the ridge lines. She marked the shadows. She studied the way the terrain funneled anyone moving through Black Canyon Valley into a handful of natural choke points. And she asked herself the question she always asked. If I wanted to hurt someone here, where would I hide? And that was when she found it. It was a spot on the eastern ridge of the valley, high and tucked back into a fold of rock, the kind of position that looked like nothing on a map and looked like everything to a trained eye. From there, a single well-placed team could see the entire valley floor. From there, anyone moving below would have no idea they were being watched until it was far, far too late. Emily sat with that image for a long time. She measured the distances. She noted the elevation. She studied the older photographs and compared them to the newer ones, and slowly, patiently, she found what she was looking for. The disturbances, the subtle changes in the terrain that no computer flags and no report ever mentions, because computers and reports don't feel the small wrongness that a human being feels when a piece of ground has been touched by hands that meant harm. Someone had been up on that ridge. Someone had been preparing it. She brought it to the next tactical meeting. The room was full when she stood, the same officers, the same cold air. Mitchell at the head of the table with his arms crossed, and his mind, she could already tell, made up. Marcus Reed sat off to the side. She laid out her images. She pointed to the eastern ridge. And she spoke in that steady, unhurried voice that some people mistook for weakness right up until the day it saved their lives. There's a hidden position here, she said. High on the eastern ridge above the main route through the valley. The terrain's been disturbed. Recently. The angle gives them full observation of anything moving below, and it's positioned exactly where a team would want to be if they intended to set up a firing point. Mortars, most likely. If we move soldiers through that valley without clearing this ridge first, we're walking them straight under someone's crosshairs. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Mitchell leaned back in his chair. Show me the intel, he said. This is the intel. Emily tapped the image. Terrain analysis, movement patterns comparison across 3 sets of imagery over 11 days. The changes are consistent with a prepared position. That's not intel, Sergeant. That's a theory. Mitchell's voice was flat. You know what the actual intelligence reports say? No confirmed hostile activity in that sector. Not a peep. No confirmed danger. And now you want me to reroute an entire operation, delay a mission, and burn resources because you looked at some shadows on a photograph and got a feeling. It's not a feeling, sir. It's exactly a feeling, Mitchell shot back. You've dressed it up in careful words, I'll give you that. But strip it down and what you've got is a hunch. And out here, I don't send men into the field based on hunches. Emily didn't raise her voice. She never did. But she leaned forward slightly, and there was iron under the calm. With respect, Captain, the reports say no confirmed danger. Confirmed. That word is doing a lot of work. It doesn't mean there's no danger. It means nobody's died yet to prove it. I'm trying to make sure we don't provide that proof. A ripple went through the room. One of the younger officers actually looked down at the images again, reconsidering. But Mitchell's face only hardened. You've been here, what, a week, he said. And you're going to stand in my briefing room and tell me the confirmed intelligence is wrong because your gut says so. I'm telling you it's incomplete. Every report is incomplete, Sergeant. That's the job. You act on the best information you have, and the best information I have says that ridge is empty. Marcus Reed spoke up then, quiet but firm. Captain, might be worth a closer look. Cost us nothing to send a small element up there ahead of the main body. Clear it, rule it out. Mitchell's eyes moved from Reed to Emily and back again, and something in them narrowed because he understood in that moment that these two had already talked. That there was a version of the room that agreed with her, and that was the one thing he could not stand. No, he said, we are not delaying a 12-man reconnaissance based on a photograph and a bad feeling. The mission goes as planned. Sergeant Carter, you'll join the team as Overwatch since you're apparently so worried. You'll carry your rifle. And if you're right, God help us, you'll have a chance to prove it. But I'm telling you right now, if you turn out to be another careful one who cries wolf, I will personally make sure that rifle is the last thing they ever hand you. He let that sit. Are we clear? The room was dead silent. Crystal, sir, Emily said. And then Mitchell did the thing that hung over everything that came after. He looked at her rifle leaned there against the wall beside her, and he said half to the room and half to himself, honestly, I still don't know why we're arming her at all. A couple of the men chuckled. He let them. Somebody remind me later. If this goes sideways, take that rifle away from her. We'll give it to somebody who'll actually use it. Emily said nothing, but Marcus Reed, watching her from across the room, saw something the others missed. He saw her hand rest just for a moment on the stock of that rifle. Not gripping it, just touching it. The way you touch something that has never once let you down in a room full of people who had. That night, she couldn't sleep at all. She sat on the edge of her bunk with the images spread out one more time, tracing that eastern ridge until she could have drawn it with her eyes closed. She wasn't angry at Mitchell. Anger was a luxury she'd given up years ago. But she was afraid, and it wasn't the kind of fear that made her want to run. It was the kind that made her want to be ready because she had learned the hardest lesson a soldier can learn. That being right doesn't save anyone. Being right on time does. Around 2 in the morning, there was a soft knock. Reed stood in the doorway, a cup of coffee in each hand. Figured you'd be up, he said, handing her one. Can't sleep. No, he said, sitting down across from her. Wouldn't think so. He nodded at the images. You really believe it. That ridge. I don't believe it, Marcus, she said. I know it. I've walked that valley 100 times in my head. There's a team up there. I can't tell you how many or exactly when they'll move. But they're there, and in about 18 hours, we're going to send 12 men right underneath them. Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then why aren't you fighting harder? You could go over his head, file a report, make noise. Emily almost smiled. You think making noise would change his mind? No, Reed admitted. Neither do I. Mitchell's already decided who I am. Nothing I say tonight moves him. The only thing that moves a man like that is being wrong in a way he can't explain away. She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. So I'm not going to waste what's left of tonight arguing. I'm going to spend it getting ready. Because when that ridge opens up, there won't be time to be believed in. There'll only be time to act. And I intend to be the one person out there who already knows exactly what to do. Reed looked at her for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough. You know, in 30 years, I've met exactly 2 kinds of soldiers who talk the way you're talking right now. The ones who are all mouth and no spine. He paused. And the ones who are about to do something the rest of us will be telling stories about for the next 20 years. Which one do you think I am? Reed stood, and he set his empty cup down, and he looked at that rifle leaning against the wall, the one the captain wanted to take away. I think, he said slowly, that Ryan Mitchell has no idea who just walked into his outpost. And I think tomorrow he's going to find out. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Get what rest you can, Sergeant. Something tells me a lot of men are going to owe you their lives before this is over. Be a shame if you were too tired to collect. He left, and Emily sat there in the dark alone with her images and her coffee and the quiet certainty that had carried her through every impossible day of her life. She did not feel brave. Bravery, she'd learned, was mostly a story people told after the fact. What she felt was ready, and in the hours before Black Canyon Valley ready was the only thing worth being. She thought about the 12 men who would walk into that valley at dawn, men who had laughed at her, men who'd wondered aloud why she was even armed, men who had no idea that the person they'd dismissed was at that very moment memorizing the exact fold of rock where their deaths were being prepared. She didn't hold it against them. That was the part nobody ever understood about her. She had made peace long ago with the idea that the people she saved might never know how close they'd come or who had pulled them back. But there was one thing she allowed herself to want sitting there in the dark. Just one. She wanted Mitchell to see it, not to apologize, not to praise her, not to add her name to some report. She wanted him to see with his own eyes in a moment where there was nowhere left to hide behind, confirmed and unconfirmed, in theories and hunches, exactly what careful looked like when everything was on the line. Because she had a feeling deep in her bones that before the sun set on the next day, the same man who wanted to take her rifle away was going to turn to her and ask her to use it. And when he did, she intended to be ready for that too. Outside, the wind came down off the mountains and moaned through the canyon like something old and patient and waiting. Emily finished her coffee. She checked her rifle one last time, though she'd already checked it 4 times that night, because that was who she was, and that was exactly why she was about to matter more than any of them could imagine. Then she lay back on her bunk, closed her eyes, and did the one thing that separated her from every man who had ever doubted her. She slept, calm and dreamless, the sleep of someone who had done the work and knew it. At Fort Raven Ridge, the last hours of the night ticked away. 12 men slept without any idea that their lives already hung on a warning nobody had believed. One captain slept certain he was right, and one sergeant, the one they'd wanted to disarm, slept certain of something else entirely. That in a matter of hours at a distance, most soldiers would call impossible everything. She was. Everything she'd endured, everything they'd refused to see, was about to be decided by a single breath, a single heartbeat, and a single shot across Black Canyon Valley. The mountain held its silence, and the morning came. Dawn broke gray and cold over Fort Raven Ridge, and the 12 men who would walk into Black Canyon Valley gathered in the yard with their gear, not one of them knowing they were already living on borrowed time. Emily Carter was the first one out. She always was. She checked her rifle in the pale light, though she'd checked it a dozen times already, and a young private named Dawson watched her do it with a smirk he didn't bother to hide. "You always this careful with your baby, Sergeant?" he asked. "Every time," Emily said, not looking up. "Must be nice having time to fuss. Rest of us just grab our stuff and go." "That's the difference between us, Private," she said quietly. "You grab and go. I already know exactly where every round is going before I ever pull the trigger." Dawson laughed, but a couple of the older men didn't. They'd been around long enough to hear the thing under her words, and it made the back of their necks prickle in a way they couldn't explain. Captain Mitchell came out last, adjusting his gloves, and the moment he saw Emily, he made a point of not looking at her rifle. That more than anything told her he was still thinking about it, still stinging from the briefing, still deciding whether he'd made the right call. "Listen up," Mitchell said, and the yard went quiet. "Simple recon, in and out. We move through the valley, we confirm there's nothing in that sector, we come home. Intelligence says it's clean. I expect it to be clean." His eyes flicked just once toward Emily. "And if anybody's been filling your heads with campfire stories about hidden shooters on the ridge, forget them. We move fast, we move smart, we don't spook at shadows. Understood?" "Yes, sir," the men answered. "Sergeant Carter." Mitchell finally turned to her. "You're Overwatch. You hang back, you watch the high ground, and you keep your theories to yourself unless something actually happens. Can you do that? I can do that, sir. Good. He turned away. And then, almost as an afterthought, he added the thing that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Try not to slow us down. Emily didn't answer. She just slung her rifle across her back and fell into position at the rear where the overwatch belongs, where the person nobody trusts gets put, so they're out of the way. Marcus Reed caught her eye as the team moved out, and he gave her the smallest nod. Stay sharp, she nodded back. Always. For the first 40 minutes, the valley gave them nothing. The team moved in a loose file along the main route, boots crunching on frost breath, fogging in the thin air. The men talked in low voices, relaxed, joking. Someone made a bet about how fast they'd be back for breakfast. Someone else complained about the cold. Mitchell walked near the front, confident, and every easy step deeper into Black Canyon Valley made him more certain that the careful sergeant at the back had been wrong. But Emily wasn't listening to the jokes. She was listening to the valley. And around the 40-minute mark, the valley changed. She felt it before she could name it. A wrongness. A silence where there shouldn't have been one. She stopped walking. Her head came up. And in that instant, every hour she'd spent bent over those satellite images collapsed into a single cold understanding. The birds were gone. At dawn, in a valley like this, there should have been sound. Movement. Small life waking in the brush along the ridges. But the eastern slope, the next slope she'd marked 11 days running, was dead quiet. Nothing moved there, nothing sang there. And there was only one reason a stretch of living ground went that still. Something up there was making everything else afraid. Reed, she said into her radio, keeping her voice flat and low. Reed, come back. A pause, then his voice quiet. Go ahead, Carter. The eastern ridge just went silent. No birds, no movement. It's the fold I marked. Another pause longer this time. Reed had been a soldier for 30 years. He knew exactly what that silence meant. You sure? I'm sure. She heard him exhale. I'll flag the captain. Up at the front, Mitchell's radio crackled, and Emily watched from 300 meters back as Reed leaned in and murmured something. She saw the captain's shoulders stiffen. She saw him shake his head, and she heard his answer come back over the net tight with irritation. Negative. We are not stopping this patrol because a bird flew away. Keep moving. Captain Reed pressed, and there was steel in it now. It's the sector she flagged. 2 minutes to clear it. That's all I'm asking. I said, keep moving, Sergeant Reed. That's an order. And so they kept moving. Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't waste a breath on frustration. Instead, she did what she always did. She got ready. As the team pushed forward toward the narrowest part of the valley, the choke point she'd identified on the maps, she began quietly and without permission to break from the file. She drifted right toward a rise of broken ground that gave her a clean angle on that eastern ridge. Not far, just far enough to see what the others couldn't, just far enough to matter. Because in her gut, she already knew. They were walking straight into the kill zone, and the only question left was whether she'd be in position in time. At the 50-minute mark, she reached the rise, dropped low, and brought her rifle up. Not to fire, to see. The scope was the best set of eyes she had, and she swept it slowly, patiently across the fold of rock she'd stared at for 11 nights. And there they were. Her breath went still in her chest. High on the eastern ridge, tucked into the exact position she'd predicted, was a mortar team. 3 men, maybe 4. She could see the tube. She could see the base plate seated into the rock. She could see the rounds stacked and ready, and the man crouched beside the tube with his hand on the first shell, waiting on the word of the man beside him, the one giving orders. The enemy commander. And below them, strung out along the valley floor, completely blind to what was above, were 12 American soldiers walking directly into the impact zone. Reed. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Reed, I have eyes on. Confirmed hostile position, eastern ridge, the fold. Mortar team. They're set up. They're loaded. They are seconds from firing on the patrol. For one terrible heartbeat, there was nothing but static. Then Reed's voice came back, and every trace of calm had drained out of it. Say again, Carter. Say again. Enemy mortar team, eastern ridge, ready to fire. The whole patrol is in the impact zone. Marcus, they're about to drop rounds right on top of you. She heard him move. She heard the sudden urgency in his voice as he grabbed Mitchell. Captain confirmed hostiles, high ground. They've got mortars ranged on us. Right now, we need to move. We need to move now. And this time, Mitchell stopped. Emily watched him through her scope, watched the man freeze in the middle of the valley floor, watched the certainty crack across his face. He looked up at the eastern ridge, and for the first time, the confirmed intelligence in his head slammed headfirst into the reality above him. There was a long, awful second where she could see him not wanting to believe it, where every part of him fought against the idea that the careful sergeant had been right and he had marched his men into the exact trap she'd described. "Where?" Mitchell said into the radio, his voice hoarse. "Carter, where are they?" "Eastern Ridge, the fold I marked on the imagery. 11 o'clock from your position high. They're behind the rock shelf. You won't see them from down there, but I see them, sir. I see them clear." "How far?" Emily's eye stayed pressed to the scope. Her mind was already working. The problem had been working it for 11 nights, and the number came to her without hesitation. 1,840 meters, she said, from my position. There was a silence on the net that seemed to swallow the whole valley. 1,840 meters, nearly 2 kilometers, a distance most soldiers would tell you was impossible, a distance that lived in the realm of legend and record books. Not real mornings on real ground with real men about to die. "That's not a shot," Mitchell breathed. "Carter, that's not a shot anybody can make. Sir, get your men into cover. Now, there's a rock line to your left, 20 meters. Move them behind it. If those rounds come down where you're standing, cover is the only thing that saves anybody." But even as she said it, she was doing the math on the cover, and the math was bad. The rock line would help against a bad shot. It would do nothing against a good one. A mortar was an area weapon. It didn't need to be precise. It just needed to drop 3 or 4 rounds into the general vicinity of 12 men standing in the open, and the valley would do the rest. The truth, and she knew it, and Reed knew it, was that there wasn't time to reach cover before the first round fell. The only thing between those 12 men and the impact was the one thing nobody at Fort Raven Ridge had believed in. Her. "Reed," she said low and fast, "get them moving toward the rocks. Buy me every second you can. I'm setting up." "Copy that. Carter, do what you can." Emily flattened herself against the ground and became in an instant the thing she had spent her entire life training to be. Everything else fell away. The cold, the doubt, the men who'd laughed at her that morning. All of it emptied out of her mind because there was no room left for anything but the shot. She settled behind the rifle. She let her breathing slow, and she began to read the space between herself and the enemy commander, 1,840 meters away. Wind. She felt it on her cheek, checked the grass, watched the way the light haze drifted along the valley floor, and then higher along the ridge where it moved differently. 2 different wind conditions near and far, and both of them would try to steal her round. Elevation. The enemy team sat well above her, and a bullet fired uphill behaves differently than one fired flat in ways most people never think about, and a marksman thinks about in her sleep. Distance. At 1,800 meters, the bullet would be in flight for over 2 full seconds, and in those 2 seconds, the earth itself would pull it down, and the wind would push it sideways, and the target could move. 2 seconds. She would have to fire it where the commander was going to be, not where he was. Her hands were perfectly steady. 60 seconds, Reed's voice murmured in her ear. "They're moving to the rocks. Some of them are dragging their feet, Carter. They don't understand yet." "Then make them understand," Emily said, not moving her eye from the scope. Through the glass, she watched the mortar team. The commander leaned over the tube, checking the angle, and she saw his hand come up. She saw him give a command to the crewman, crouch with the round. She saw the crewman lift the shell toward the mouth of the tube. They were about to fire. They were right now in the last seconds of preparation, and once that first round dropped into the tube, there would be no stopping it. "Reed," her voice didn't change at all. "They're loading. First round is going in the tube. I need the captain to make a decision in the next 10 seconds, or those men die where they stand." Captain Reed's shout came across the net. "She's got the shot lined up 1,840 meters. She needs your authorization, and she needs it now." And there it was, the moment. The whole thing came down to Ryan Mitchell, the man who had wanted to take her rifle away that very morning, standing in the middle of a valley with 12 lives on his hands and one impossible shot as his only chance. Emily heard him breathing over the net. She heard the war going on inside him. Because a shot like that at that distance, without confirmation, without approval from up the chain, from a soldier he did not trust, was the kind of decision that ended careers when it went wrong. And it would almost certainly go wrong. Nobody made that shot. Nobody in the world made that shot on a moving target with 2 wind conditions and an uphill angle and 2 seconds of flight time. But if he waited for approval, if he did the safe thing, the correct thing, the thing that protected him, 12 men would be dead before anyone answered the radio. Carter, Mitchell's voice was almost unrecognizable. Can you actually make it? Tell me the truth, not what I want to hear, the truth. And in that instant, Emily understood something about the man. He wasn't asking whether the shot was possible. He was asking whether he could believe in her. After a morning of telling her he couldn't, after weeks of treating her like a mistake on paper. He was standing in the ruins of everything he'd been so sure of asking the one person he doubted the most to save him. Sir, she said, and her voice was steady as stone, I've made this shot 10,000 times in my head, on the range, on paper. I've spent my whole life getting ready for exactly this. You asked me this morning why we even arm me. She drew a slow breath. This is why. There was the longest pause of Ryan Mitchell's life. Then cracked and quiet and utterly transformed, his voice came across the net. Do it. Sergeant Carter, take the shot. But the words had barely left his mouth when Reed's voice cut across the channel, sharp with alarm. Carter, wait, they're repositioning, the commander's moving. Emily's eyes snapped back to the scope and her stomach dropped. It was true. The enemy commander had stepped away from the tube, moving along the ridge, gesturing to his men, changing the whole picture in the space of a breath. The shot she'd built, the wind she'd read, the lead she'd calculated, all of it was for a man who was no longer standing where he'd been. He's moving, she said more to herself than anyone. Come on, stop. 10 seconds, Carter, Reed said. They're going to fire. The commander walked. 2 steps. 3. And Emily did the hardest thing a marksman ever does. She waited. She did not chase him with the rifle. She did not panic and fire at a running target. She held and she watched and she trusted the one thing her whole life had taught her, that a man giving orders always stops. Always. He plants himself and he points and he commands. Movement is temporary. Command is a posture. And a commander in the final seconds before he unleashes his attack will stop to watch it begin. Carter, we're out of time. Reed's voice was climbing. Not yet, Emily breathed. The commander reached the tube. And he stopped. He planted his feet. He raised his hand to give the order to fire. He went absolutely still, exactly where she knew he would, and in that half second, Emily's entire being poured itself into the rifle. She read the wind one final time. She held her lead. She placed the crosshair not on him but on the empty air where he would still be in 2 seconds' time, and she began the long, slow squeeze that every part of her had rehearsed 10,000 times. Everybody down! Reed screamed across the valley. Get down, get down, get down. Emily's breath went out. The world narrowed to a single point of light. And in the silence between one heartbeat and the next at 1,840 meters, with 12 lives balanced on the edge of a decision that a captain had almost failed to make, Sergeant Emily Carter began to press the trigger. But even as she did, a cold thought moved through her like ice water, the kind of thought only the very best ever have in the final instant, the thought that separates the marksman from the legend. The haze along the ridge had shifted. The wind in the last 3 seconds had changed. She felt it against her cheek, a fraction of a difference, a breath of movement that hadn't been there when she'd built the shot. And she knew with the certainty of 10,000 hours that if she fired the shot she'd calculated she would miss. By inches. Inches were as good as miles at 1,800 meters. The round would sail past the commander's head, and he would drop the shell in the tube, and 12 men would die, and the last thing they'd ever know was that someone had tried and failed to save them. She had less than a second to decide, and this was the moment, the true moment, the one that no report would ever capture, and no medal would ever explain. Because a lesser shooter would have already fired. A lesser shooter told to take the shot, given permission at last, desperate to prove herself, after a lifetime of doubt, would have pulled that trigger the instant she was cleared, and prayed. But Emily Carter had never once in her entire life prayed and pulled. She calculated. Even now, even here, even with a captain's voice still ringing in her ears and 12 men's lives draining away 1 second at a time, Some deep, unshakable core of her refused to fire a shot she knew was wrong. She adjusted. In the space of half a heartbeat, she rebuilt the entire shot. New wind, new hold. A tiny shift of the crosshair, a fraction of a degree, that a computer would take a full second to compute and that she solved in the time it took her heart to beat once, because she had not been fussing that morning when Dawson mocked her. She had been becoming the person who could do this. Reed's voice distant now underwater. Carter. The commander's hand began to fall, the order to fire. Emily exhaled the last of her breath, and on the empty bottom of that breath, in the stillness she'd spent 30 years learning to find, she pressed the trigger the rest of the way. The rifle fired, and then there was nothing to do but wait. 2 seconds. That was how long the round would fly. 2 seconds across 1,840 meters of thin mountain air, through 2 different winds over the heads of 12 men who had no idea their lives were riding on a bullet already in flight. Emily didn't move. She couldn't call it back. She couldn't correct it. The shot was gone, and everything she'd endured, everything they'd refused to see, was now traveling downrange at the mercy of physics and one woman's refusal to be rushed. 1 second. On the valley floor, the men were down behind the rocks, and Mitchell was staring up at the ridge, and Reed had stopped breathing. 1.5 seconds. Through her scope, Emily watched the enemy commander, his hand dropping the word to fire, already forming it on his lips, the crewman's hand tilting the mortar around toward the mouth of the tube. 2 seconds, and the enemy commander fell. He dropped where he stood folded and gone before the sound of the shot ever reached him, before he ever knew a rifle existed 1,800 meters away, before the order to fire could leave his mouth. The mortar round, already tilting toward the tube, slipped from the stunned crewman's hands and clattered harmlessly against the rock. The attack that would have killed 12 American soldiers died in the same instant its commander did, at the far end of a shot that no one in that valley had believed was possible. For one long, ringing second, nothing moved. Then the valley erupted with the sound of men who had just realized they were still alive. "He's down," Reed's voice cracked across the net, raw with disbelief. "Carter, he's down, you got him." The whole team's scattering. They're breaking. They're running. And it was true. Through her scope, Emily watched the remaining mortar crew stare in horror at their fallen commander, at the impossible thing that had reached out of nowhere and struck him dead. And then she watched them abandon the tube and run, because there is nothing on earth more terrifying to a soldier than an enemy he cannot see and cannot fight. They fled up over the ridge and were and then leaving their weapon behind, leaving their commander behind, leaving 12 Americans standing alive in a valley that had been seconds from becoming their grave. Emily lowered the rifle. Her hands at last were not perfectly steady. She let out a breath that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul, and for just a moment she closed her eyes. On the valley floor, Captain Ryan Mitchell stood among his men, and he turned slowly to look back 300 meters to the rise of broken ground where a sergeant he'd wanted to disarm that very morning lay behind a rifle he'd questioned whether she should even carry. And the look on his face was not relief. It was something far heavier than relief. It was the face of a man who had just been shown, in the most undeniable way a man can ever be shown, exactly how wrong he had been. The men were shouting now, some of them laughing, the wild, shaking laughter of people who had brushed against death and lived. Dawson, the young private who'd smirked at her that morning, that was staring up at the ridge and then back at Emily's position with his mouth open, all his easy jokes gone. And Reed, old Marcus, Reed, who'd brought her coffee at 2 a.m. and asked which kind of soldier she was, stood in the middle of it all with tears standing in his eyes, because now he knew. 12, he said quietly into the radio just for her. 12 men going home tonight, Carter. Every last one of them. Because of you. Emily didn't answer right away. She was watching the empty ridge through her scope, always making sure that the threat was truly gone before she let herself feel anything at all. Only when she was certain, only when the last of the enemy had vanished over the rock and the valley was silent again, in a way that meant safe and not death, did she finally speak. "Everybody accounted for?" she asked. "Everybody," Reed said. "Not a scratch." "Then let's go home." She rose from behind the rifle and she slung it across her back. The same rifle, the one they'd laughed at, the one Mitchell had ordered them to take away if things went sideways. Things had gone sideways, and it had been the only thing that mattered. As she made her way down off the rise to rejoin the team, the men fell silent around her. It was a strange, heavy silence, Not the mocking quiet of that morning, but something else entirely. Something like awe, and something like shame. They looked at her differently now, every one of them, and they didn't quite know what to say to the person they'd spent weeks dismissing, the person who had just done the impossible while they'd been busy underestimating her. Mitchell was the last one she reached. He stood apart from the others, waiting for her, and when she stopped in front of him, the two of them just looked at each other for a long moment. All around them, the men watched because everyone understood that something was happening here that mattered more than the shot itself. "Sergeant Carter," Mitchell began, and his voice wasn't steady. "That was—" He stopped. He looked up at the ridge 1,840 meters away, and then back at her, and the words seemed to fail him entirely. "I've never seen anything like that in my life. I didn't think it was possible. I told you it wasn't possible." "I know, sir," Emily said. There was no triumph in it. No, I told you so. Just a quiet steadiness that had never once left her. "This morning I said—" Mitchell's jaw worked. "This morning I told them to take your rifle away." "I remember, sir." And there it was, hanging in the cold air between them in front of every man on that patrol. The captain who had doubted her, and the sergeant who had saved him anyway, and 12 witnesses who had watched the whole thing unfold. For a moment, Emily thought he might apologize. She could see it there right at the edge of him, the words trying to come. She could see the shame and the gratitude and the shock all fighting for room on his face. And she waited not because she needed the apology, she had stopped needing things like that a long time ago, but because she wanted to see whether Ryan Mitchell was the kind of man who could actually say it. But before he could, one of the men called out, breaking the moment urgent. "Captain, we need to sweep that mortar position, recover the weapon, confirm the site's clear before we move out." Mitchell blinked and the officer in him snapped back into place, and whatever he'd been about to say to Emily folded itself away unspoken. "Right," he said. "Reed, take a team up the ridge. Carter, you're overwatch again. Cover them." "Yes, sir," she said. And that was it. That was the whole of it. No apology, no name spoken aloud in front of the men. The moment passed and the mission went on, the way missions always do, and Emily took her position and covered Reed's team as they climbed the eastern ridge to the fold of rock. She'd marked 11 nights running the exact spot she'd stood in that briefing room and warned them all about the spot they'd told her was empty, the spot where a mortar team had very nearly killed everyone she was now protecting. Reed reached the position first, and what he found there stopped him cold. "Carter," his voice came over the radio, low and strange. "You need to hear this." "Go ahead." This setup, a pause. This wasn't some scratch position, some patrol that stumbled into a good spot. This was prepared. Range cards, pre-plotted firing data. They knew our route. They knew our timing. They'd been up here for days, Carter ranging that valley, waiting for exactly the patrol that walked into it this morning. Another pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy. "You didn't just spot a threat. You called the whole thing. Days ago, down to the fold in the rock, and they told you no." Emily was quiet for a moment. On the valley floor below, she could see Mitchell listening to the same transmission, could see his head drop, could see the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. "I know, Marcus," she said finally. "I know." The recovery took another hour. They photographed the position, recovered the abandoned mortar and the range cards and every scrap of evidence of just how close it had all come. And then at last they turned for home. 12 men and one captain and one sergeant walking out of Black Canyon Valley in the late morning light, every one of them alive. Every one of them changed whether they understood it yet or not. They walked in silence for a long while, and then one by one the men began to drift toward Emily. Dawson was the first, the young private, and he fell into step beside her without quite meeting her eyes. "Sergeant," he said, "this morning, what I said about you fussing over your rifle." He swallowed. "I was out of line." "You didn't know," Emily said simply. "No," Dawson said. "I didn't." He was quiet a moment. "That fussing, that's not fussing, is it? That's the whole thing. That's why you're alive, and the rest of us just get lucky." Emily looked at him, then this kid who'd smirked at her at dawn and was walking home at noon because of her. "It's not luck I'm interested in, Private," she said. "Luck runs out, preparation doesn't." He nodded slowly, and something in him seemed to grow up a little in that moment, and he didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. One by one, the other men came too, some with words, some with just a look, a nod, a hand on the shoulder, and every one of them was saying the same thing in their own way. We saw you. We finally see you. We're sorry it took your saving our lives for us to look. But Emily, walking through them, accepting their nods with the same quiet grace she'd shown their scorn, felt something turning cold in her chest. Because she'd been here before. She'd made the impossible shot before in other valleys on other days for other men who doubted her. And she knew with a certainty that came from long and bitter experience that the gratitude of the moment and the record of history were two very different things. The men were grateful now, but gratitude fades. And when this mission was written up, when the reports were filed and the credit was assigned, she had a cold, hard feeling about whose name would be on them and whose would not. She looked ahead to where Captain Mitchell walked at the front of the column, the man who had almost let them all die, the man who had given the order to fire and would quite rightly have to report why an impossible shot had been necessary in a sector that intelligence swore was clean. And she wondered, walking home through the cold, what a man like that would do when he sat down to write the story of the morning. He was proven so completely, so publicly wrong. She had a feeling she already knew. They came out of the valley in the early afternoon, and Fort Raven Ridge rose up ahead of them, and the men let out a ragged cheer at the sight of home. But Emily didn't cheer. She just kept walking that rifle on her back, her eyes forward, because for her, the mission wasn't over. The shot was made. The men were saved. But somewhere in the hours ahead, in a quiet office with a keyboard and an official report, a second battle was waiting for her. One that no rifle could win. One that would come down to whether the truth mattered more than a captain's pride. And Emily Carter, who had spent her whole life being right and being ignored in the same breath, walked back through the gates of Fort Raven Ridge, already knowing that the hardest shot she'd take that day had nothing to do with a rifle at all. The debrief was scheduled for 4 o'clock. And by the time Emily walked into the command building, the story of the shot had already spread through Fort Raven Ridge like fire through dry grass. Men she'd never spoken to stepped aside to let her pass. A cook leaned out of the mess hall doorway just to watch her go by. 1,840 meters. The number was on everybody's lips, growing with each retelling the way numbers do, and Emily let it wash past her without a flicker, because she'd learned long ago that being talked about and being respected were not the same thing. Reed caught up with her in the corridor. "You ready for this?" he asked. "For a debrief, I've sat through 100 of them." "Not like this one." Reed's face was grim. "Word is Mitchell's already been on the line with regional command. Been in there over an hour." Emily stopped. "Saying what?" "Don't know. But I know the man. And I know that look he had walking out of that valley." Reed lowered his voice. "A man that proud, Carter, when he gets proven wrong in front of 12 witnesses, he's got 2 roads he can take. He can own it, or he can find a way to make it smaller." Emily said nothing, but something tightened behind her eyes. The debrief room was full when they entered. All 12 men from the patrol, plus a handful of officers who hadn't been there but wanted to hear it firsthand. Mitchell stood at the head of the table with the folder in his hands, and when Emily walked in, his eyes met hers for just a moment before sliding away. That was the first sign. A man who is about to do the right thing looks you in the eye. A man who's already made a different choice can't. "Let's get started," Mitchell said. He walked them through the mission, the route, the timing, the moment the patrol had made contact with the hostile position. And Emily listened, and with every sentence a cold certainty grew in her chest because she could hear what was happening. She could hear it in the words he chose and the words he left out. At approximately 0845, Mitchell said, the patrol identified a hostile mortar position on the eastern ridge. The designated marksman was able to engage and neutralize the enemy commander at extended range, disrupting the attack and allowing the patrol to withdraw safely. The designated marksman, not Sergeant Carter, not Emily, the designated marksman, as though she were a role and not a person, as though anyone holding that rifle could have done what she did. Reed's head came up sharply. A couple of the men shifted in their seats, and Dawson, the young private, actually opened his mouth as if to speak before Reed caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. The patrol, Mitchell continued, responded well under pressure. Good discipline, good coordination. This is a textbook example of a unit reacting to unexpected contact and Unexpected, sir. The words came out of Emily quiet and level, but they cut through the room like a blade. Mitchell stopped. Excuse me, Sergeant. You said unexpected contact. Emily didn't raise her voice. She never did. I want to make sure I understand the record correctly. Are we characterizing this morning's contact as unexpected? The room went very still. The intelligence reports indicated no confirmed hostile activity in that sector, Mitchell said carefully. By any reasonable standard, the contact was unexpected. By the standard of the intelligence reports, Emily agreed, but not by the standard of the tactical assessment I presented in this exact room at that exact table 3 days ago, when I identified that position, that fold in the eastern ridge, when I told this command that a prepared enemy firing point was likely there, and that moving soldiers through the valley without clearing it would put them under hostile guns. She let that settle. I have that on record, sir, so I'd like to understand how a threat I named 3 days ago becomes unexpected today. You could have heard a pin drop. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Sergeant Carter, this is a debrief, not a... It's a record, sir, Emily said. That's all a debrief is. It's the record. And I've spent my whole career watching records get written by the people who were wrong instead of the people who were right. I'd just like this one to be accurate. For a long, dangerous moment, the two of them stared at each other across the room, and every man present understood that the real battle of the day was happening right now in this room unarmed. It was Reed who broke the silence. She's right, Captain. His voice was calm and heavy with 30 years of authority. I was on the radio. I flagged her assessment to you this morning in the field before contact. She called the silence on that ridge. She called the position. She called the range. I heard all of it. So did the net. He looked around the room. If we're writing this up as unexpected contact and a lucky shot by a designated marksman, then we're writing a lie. And I've filed too many honest reports over too many years to start signing false ones now. Something passed across Mitchell's face. Anger first, then something more complicated underneath it. Nobody's writing a lie, Sergeant Reed, he said, but there was less iron in it now. Then let's write the truth, Reed said simply. Her name, her assessment, the date she filed it. Let the record show she saw it coming, and that command said no, and that when it happened exactly the way she said it would, she made a shot that shouldn't have been humanly possible and saved 12 men. He paused. That's the truth, Captain. All of it. The good and the parts that don't make us look so good. And there it was, the heart of it. Because Emily understood watching Mitchell's face that the reason her name was missing from that report wasn't malice. It was that to tell her story truthfully meant telling his. It meant putting on the permanent record that Captain Ryan Mitchell had been warned in detail 3 days in advance and had dismissed the warning and had marched 12 men into a trap that a sergeant he refused to trust had described down to the fold in the rock. Her recognition and his failure were the same sentence. You could not write one without the other. That was the trap he was in, and that was why, God help him, part of him had reached for the easier story. I need the room, Mitchell said suddenly. Everyone except Sergeant Carter. Now. The men filed out. Reed was the last to go, and he paused at the door and looked back at Emily, and the look said, everything. Hold your ground. I've got your back. She gave him a small nod, and he left, and the door closed, and then it was just the two of them. For a moment, neither spoke. You put me in a hell of a position, Sergeant, Mitchell finally said. With respect, sir, I didn't put you anywhere. You put yourself there 3 days ago when you told me my assessment was a hunch. Emily's voice stayed even. I'm just the one still standing here after it turned out to be right. Mitchell set the folder down on the table and pressed his hands flat against it, and for the first time all day, the officer seemed to drain out of him, leaving just the man. You want to know what I said to Regional Command? And he asked. For that hour I was on the phone. He didn't wait for an answer. I told them we had unexpected contact and a marksman got lucky. I said it before I'd even thought it through. It just came out because the truth was... He stopped. His throat worked. The truth was too much to say out loud yet. I know, Emily said quietly. Do you... He looked up at her and there was real anguish in his face now. 12 men, Sergeant. I almost got 12 men killed. Not through bad luck. Not through a fair mistake anybody could have made. You told me. You stood right there and you told me in plain words, and I looked at you and I decided I knew better because... He cut himself off. Because of what I look like, Emily finished for him without cruelty. Because I didn't match the picture in your head of who gets to be right. Mitchell flinched, but he didn't deny it. That was the first honest thing he'd done all day. I've been an officer for 16 years, he said. I've built my whole career on trusting my judgment, on reading people, reading situations, making the call. And this morning I found out that my judgment almost put a dozen men in the ground. Do you understand what that does to a man? Everything I thought I was good at, the one thing. His voice broke slightly. And the person who saw what I couldn't is somebody I spent 3 weeks treating like she didn't belong. Emily was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, there was something gentler in her voice than there had been all day, though no less firm. Can I tell you what the real mistake was, sir? It wasn't doubting me. Officers doubt new soldiers. That's not a crime. The mistake was deciding you didn't need to check. Doubt isn't dangerous. Doubt just means you're not sure. Certainty is what's dangerous. You weren't uncertain about that ridge, sir. You were certain it was empty. And you were certain because I was the one saying it wasn't. She held his gaze. If a man you trusted had walked in with the exact same photographs, you'd have sent a team to clear that ridge without blinking. You know that's true. Mitchell closed his eyes. Yeah, he said hoarsely. I know. So here's where we actually are, Emily continued. In about 2 hours, you're going to sit down and finish that report. And you've got a choice to make that's got nothing to do with me and everything to do with who you are. You can write the easy version. Unexpected contact. Lucky marksman, it'll protect you. Regional command will never know how close it came. Your record stays clean. She paused. Or you can write the true version. And yeah, it'll cost you. There'll be questions. There'll be a review maybe. Somebody upstairs is going to want to know how a captain ignored a documented threat assessment and nearly lost a patrol. And you're asking me to choose the one that hangs me, Mitchell said. No, sir. Emily shook her head slowly. I'm not asking you to do anything. That's the part you keep missing about me. I don't beg. I don't campaign. I laid out my case 3 days ago and you said no, and I didn't argue then either. I just went and got ready to be right. She picked up her rifle from where she'd rested it against the wall. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, though. I documented my assessment 3 days ago. Time stamped. Filed. That record exists whether you mention me or not. So the truth is already written down, sir. It's already there. The only question is whether it comes out because you told it honestly or because someone finds it later and asks why you didn't. Mitchell stared at her. That's not a threat, Emily added. I want to be clear about that. I'm not holding it over you. I'm just telling you the truth is a stubborn thing. It tends to surface, and a man's a lot better off being the one who told it than the one who got caught hiding it. For a long moment, Mitchell said nothing. Then quietly, why are you like this? Like what, sir? So calm about it. I nearly got you killed. I tried to write you out of your own story, and you're standing there talking to me like a counselor instead of somebody who's got every right to want my head. And here, for the first time all day, something shifted in Emily's face. A crack in the stillness. And what showed through it was not anger, but something older and sadder. You want to know why, she said softly. Because you're not the first captain. You're not the 10th. I have made the impossible shot before, in other valleys. For other men who looked at me the way you did. And every single time I watched the credit go somewhere else, and I watched the report leave my name off, and the first few times it broke my heart. It really did. She looked down at the rifle in her hands. And then one day I decided I wasn't going to let the small men decide what my life meant. Because if I need your report to know what I did this morning, then I've handed you power over me that you didn't earn and don't deserve. 12 men are alive tonight. I know it. They know it. That's real whether it's written down or not. She met his eyes. So no, sir. I'm not standing here wanting your head. I stopped needing things like that a long time ago. That's not strength exactly. It's just what's left after the anger burns off. The room was silent, and Ryan Mitchell, 16 years an officer, a proud man in the ruins of his certainty, looked at this sergeant he'd tried to disarm that very morning, and something in him finally completely broke open. Get Reed, he said quietly, and get the men. Bring them back in. Sir, we're going to do the debrief again. His voice was rough but steady. The right way this time. And I want witnesses. I want it on record in front of all of them exactly how this morning they happened. Every part of it, including the parts where I was wrong. Emily studied him for a moment. You understand what that cost you. I understand what it cost me to almost bury 12 men because I couldn't stand the idea that a quiet sergeant saw something I didn't, Mitchell said. That's the bill I'm actually worried about paying. The rest is just paperwork. He straightened, and for the first time he looked her in the eye and held it. Go get them, Sergeant, please. She got them. They filed back in, and all of them Reed at the front with a question on his face, and they took their seats. And Mitchell stood at the head of the table with the folder closed in front of him, and his hands no longer flat against it, but hanging at his sides, the posture of a man who had decided to stop hiding. I'm going to start this debrief over, he said, because the version I gave you was wrong. Not inaccurate about the shot, wrong about the story. He took a breath. 3 days ago in this room, Sergeant Emily Carter presented a tactical assessment identifying a hostile firing position on the eastern ridge of Black Canyon Valley. She described the location, the likely armament, and the danger to any patrol moving through the valley. She was specific. She was thorough, and I dismissed it. He let the words land. I called it a hunch. I said the intelligence report showed no confirmed danger, and I chose to believe the reports over the soldier in front of me. That decision was mine, and this morning that decision nearly killed all 12 of you. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Everything that happened out there, Mitchell went on, and his voice was thick now, happened because one soldier saw it coming 3 days early, warned us, was ignored, and then saved us anyway. At 1,840 meters, on a moving target, after the officer who doubted her finally had the sense to get out of her way and let her do her job. He looked at Emily. That's the record. That's what goes in the report. Her name, her assessment, the date she filed it, and my failure to act on it. All of it. For a moment, there was only silence. And then Dawson, the young private, started to clap. Just one man, slow and uncertain at first. Then Reed joined him. Then another, and within seconds the whole room was on its feet, and the sound of it filled the little debrief room at Fort Raven Ridge. 12 men who were alive because of the woman standing quietly by the wall with a rifle in her hands and no expression she'd let anyone read. But Emily wasn't celebrating. Not inside. Because even as the men clapped, even as Mitchell did the honorable thing at last, some cold and experienced part of her was already looking past this room, past this moment, to what came next. Because she'd been a soldier long enough to know that a captain saying the right words in a debrief and the Army's machinery actually recording them were two very different things. Words in a room evaporate. The official report, the one that traveled up the chain to regional command, the one that became history, that was a different animal entirely. And she'd seen honorable intentions die quiet deaths in the space between the debrief and the paperwork more times than she could count. The applause died down. Mitchell dismissed the men, and they filed out, several of them stopping to say something to Emily on the way, and this time she let herself accept it, a nod here, a quiet word there. When the room had emptied, only Reed remained, and Mitchell and Emily. That took guts, Captain, Reed said. Won't pretend it didn't. It took a sergeant with a rifle and a longer memory than my pride, Mitchell said. He looked exhausted, like the day had aged him. Reed, I need you to do something, off the books, for now. He turned to Emily. I need Carter's original assessment, the one she filed 3 days ago, the physical copy, the timestamp, all of it. I want it attached to the report before it goes up the chain. Not summarized, not referenced, attached, whole. Reed frowned. That should be easy enough. It's in the tactical files. Then pull it, Mitchell said, tonight, before anything else happens to it. Something in the way he said it made Emily's attention sharpen. Before anything happens to it, sir, what would happen to it? Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Probably nothing, he said, but this morning made me realize I've been assuming a lot of things were solid that maybe aren't. And I'd feel a whole lot better with that document in my own hands. He rubbed his face. Call it a careful man's habit. I'm trying to learn a few of those. Reed left to retrieve the file, and Emily and Mitchell stood alone once more in the quiet room. Sir, she said, can I ask you something? After today, you can ask me anything. Why now, she said. You had the easy way out. Regional Command already believed the Lucky Marksman story. Reed had your back, but he wouldn't have gone over your head, not against a fellow officer, and you knew that. You could have walked out of here with a clean record and nobody the wiser. She studied him. So why'd you choose the version that cost you? Mitchell was silent for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice was quiet and honest in a way it hadn't been all day. Because of what you said, about certainty being the dangerous thing. He looked at her. And this morning I found out my certainty is exactly the thing that almost killed everybody. So I figured. He almost smiled, tired and rueful. I figured maybe the least I could do is be certain about one thing that's actually true. And what's true is that Sergeant Emily Carter saved my patrol, and I damn near buried her contribution to save my own skin. If I can't be certain enough about that to write it down, then I've got no business being certain about anything. Emily looked at him for a long moment, and then quietly she said the thing she'd been holding back all day. That right there, sir, she said. That's the officer those 12 men needed this morning. He was just 3 days late. There was no cruelty in it. It was almost gentle. But better late than never. And a man who can admit he was wrong in front of his whole unit, that's rarer than the shot I made today. A whole lot rarer. For the first time, Ryan Mitchell smiled a real smile, small and broken and grateful. Go get some rest, Sergeant, he said. You about earned it about 10 times over. Emily nodded and she picked up her rifle and she moved toward the door. But she stopped with her hand on the frame and she looked back because that cold, experienced instinct in her was still whispering, and she'd learned a long time ago to listen to it. Sir, that report, when does it go up the chain? Tomorrow morning, 0800. Why? Emily was quiet a moment. Just a feeling, she said, the kind you taught me not to ignore. She almost smiled. Get that document in your hands tonight, sir. And when the report goes up tomorrow, watch it go up yourself. Don't hand it to anyone. Don't let it sit in anyone's inbox overnight. Walk it up the chain personally with my assessment attached, and make sure the person who receives it looks you in the eye when they take it. Mitchell frowned. You think someone would interfere? I think, Emily said carefully, that the truth we just wrote down makes a lot of people look bad. Not just you. The intelligence shop that said no confirmed danger. Whoever signed off on sending 12 men into a valley without clearing the high ground. That report doesn't just tell my story, sir. It asks a lot of uncomfortable questions about a lot of people above your pay grade. She met his eyes. And in my experience, uncomfortable questions have a way of disappearing between the desk they're written on and the desk they're supposed to reach. So watch it. That's all I'm saying. You did the hard part today. Don't let someone else undo it while you sleep. And with that, she stepped out into the corridor, leaving Captain Ryan Mitchell standing alone in the debrief room, staring at the folder on the table, feeling for the first time the full weight of what he'd set in motion and understanding, with a slow and dawning unease, that the quiet sergeant had just warned him of a second danger he hadn't even seen coming, just the way she'd warned him of the first. Reed found him at 9 that night, and the look on the old sergeant's face told Mitchell everything before a word was spoken. It's gone, Reed said. Mitchell's stomach dropped. What do you mean gone? Carter's assessment, the one she filed 3 days ago, the physical copy's not in the tactical files where it should be. And when I pulled the digital record, Reed set a printout on the desk. Look at the timestamp on the file's last modification. Mitchell looked, and the blood went out of his face. Somebody accessed it at 6:40 this evening, Reed said quietly. 2 hours ago, right after our debrief let out. And they didn't just read it, Captain. The document's been altered. The specifics are stripped out. The eastern ridge, the fold in the rock, the prediction of a prepared firing position. All of it. What's left just says she noted general concerns about the sector. He let that hang. General concerns, not the assessment that called the whole thing 3 days early, just vague enough to mean nothing. Just vague enough that when the report goes up tomorrow, there's nothing on file to back up her story. Mitchell sat down slowly. Who has access to those files? That's the question, isn't it? Reed's jaw was tight. Command staff, the intelligence shop, a handful of senior NCOs. Not many, but enough. He paused. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't delete it because a deleted file raises questions. They edited it so that if anyone checks there's a document there, it just happens to say the wrong thing. It's clean, it's quiet. And by tomorrow morning, when your honest report goes up the chain, the evidence that proves the honest part will already be gutted. For a long moment, Mitchell didn't speak. He just stared at the printout, and Emily's words from that afternoon came back to him with a chill. Uncomfortable questions have a way of disappearing between the desk they're written on and the desk they're supposed to reach. She knew, he said quietly. She stood right there and told me to get that document in my hands tonight. She told me it would happen. He looked up at Reed. How does she know? How does she keep seeing these things before they happen? Because she's been living inside this exact story her whole career, Reed said. This isn't the first time somebody has tried to erase her captain. She told you that herself. She just never expected you'd care enough to try and stop it. He picked up the printout. The question now is what we do about it, because that report goes up in 11 hours, and right now the file that backs up the truth is gone. Mitchell stood. Get Carter, now. Emily arrived within 10 minutes, and when Reed laid it out for her, the altered file, the 6:40 timestamp, the gutted assessment, she didn't look surprised. She didn't look angry. She just nodded slowly, the way a person nods when the thing they have been bracing for finally arrives. There it is, she said softly. You're not even surprised, Mitchell said. No, sir, I'm not. She pulled out a chair and sat calm as still water. I told you, this is the second battle. It's the one I've lost every time before. The shot is easy, Captain. The shot is physics and practice. This part, she gestured at the printout. This is where they usually win, because the men who do this are patient and quiet, and they know that all they have to do is make the record just murky enough that nobody wants to fight about it. Well, I want to fight about it, Mitchell said, and there was heat in his voice now. Emily looked at him, and something almost like warmth crossed her face. I know you do, sir, and that's already more than I've ever had before, but wanting to fight isn't enough. We need proof. Right now, all we have is a suspicion and an altered file with no original to compare it against is just your word against theirs. And theirs, sir, is the intelligence shop and command staff. Yours is one captain who already looks bad in this story. She shook her head. We take this up the chain now with what we have, and we lose. And worse, we tip them off that we know. Reed leaned forward. So what do we do? And here for the first time, a small, cold smile touched the corner of Emily's mouth. The smile of someone who had been erased enough times to finally learn the trick of it. We use the thing they never think about, she said. The thing that saved me every time I've been smart enough to remember it. She looked at both of them. I never filed just one copy. Mitchell went still. What? 15 years, Captain, Emily said. 15 years of watching my work get buried, edited, credited to other people, or lost. You think I didn't learn? The first few times it broke my heart. But somewhere around year 5, I got smart. Every assessment I file, every warning I write, every prediction I make, I keep a second copy. Time-stamped, independent, somewhere no one else can touch it. She reached into her jacket and set a small, worn notebook on the desk. This one's paper, old-fashioned. But paper doesn't have a modification timestamp somebody can quietly change at 6:40 in the evening. Paper just says what is said the day you wrote it. She opened the notebook to a page marked with a folded corner, and she turned it toward Mitchell. And there it was in her own careful handwriting dated 3 days ago. The eastern ridge, the fold in the rock, the prediction of a prepared mortar position, the exact assessment she'd presented in that briefing room. Whole, untouched. Real. Mitchell stared at it. That's the truth, sir, Emily said. In my own hand dated the day I saw it. And that's not all. She turned another page. I don't just keep my assessments. I keep everything. When the assessment got dismissed in that briefing 3 days ago, I wrote that down too. Who was in the room? What was said? The exact words, including the part where you called it a hunch, sir, which I'm sorry to say is in here, but it's the truth, and I don't edit my own record even when it's uncomfortable for people I've started to respect. Mitchell almost laughed a short, stunned sound. You've got me admitting I ignored you. In writing, dated 3 days ago. I've got everything, sir. That's the whole point. She closed the notebook. The people who erase records always assume the record is a single thing they can control. One file, one copy. They never imagine that the person they're erasing has been keeping her own history in parallel the entire time, because it never occurs to them that she'd have to. That's their weakness. They think erasing the official copy erases the truth, but the truth was never in their file. The truth was always in mine. For a long moment, the room was silent. And then Reed let out a low, slow breath and shook his head with something like reverence. 15 years, he said. You've been keeping a shadow record for 15 years because you knew someday somebody would try exactly this. Not new, Emily corrected gently. Just learned. The hard way. Enough times that I stopped being surprised. She looked down at the notebook. You want to know the loneliest thing in the world, Marcus? It's keeping proof of your own worth in a book that nobody's ever asked to see. 15 years of writing down the truth about myself just in case and never once needing to show it to a single soul who cared. She looked up and her eyes moved to Mitchell. This is the first time, in 15 years, that anyone in a position to matter actually wanted the truth badly enough to ask. Her voice was quiet. So thank you, sir, for being the first. You have no idea what that's worth. Something moved across Mitchell's face and he had to look away for a moment. All right, he said finally, his voice rough. So we've got proof. Your notebook dated in your hand matching the assessment that got gutted. That's real evidence. But it's still your record against their altered file. A defense lawyer would call that a wash. He frowned, thinking, we need to catch them. We need to prove the file was altered, and by who, not just that a truer version exists somewhere. And here Reed spoke up, and there was a hard glint in his old eyes. I can do that, he said. The digital file's been altered, but the system keeps the access logs. Whoever edited that document at 6:40 left a footprint, a user account, a terminal. Now they were smart enough to alter the content, but I'd bet good money they weren't smart enough to think about the logs, because people who edit files never think about the fact that the system is watching them do it. He stood. Give me an hour. I've been pulling access logs on this base for 20 years. If somebody touched that file, I'll have their name. Do it, Mitchell said. Reed left, and the hour that followed was one of the longest of Ryan Mitchell's life. He and Emily sat in the office, and for a while, neither of them spoke. Then quietly, Mitchell said the thing that had been sitting on him all day. Can I ask you something, Sergeant? And I want an honest answer. Those are the only kind I give, sir. If Reed hadn't caught the altered file tonight, if I'd sent that report up tomorrow the way I wrote it honest with your name in it, and then Command had checked the tactical files and found nothing but general concerns about the sector. He met her eyes. You'd have looked like a liar, or worse, like I was covering for you. The whole thing would have collapsed, and you'd have known watching it happen exactly how it was done. He paused. How many times has that happened to you? How many times have you watched someone gut the record and had no notebook to save you? Emily was quiet for a long moment, and when she answered, her voice was very steady, which was somehow worse than if it had shaken. Twice, she said. Twice I had the proof and it didn't matter because nobody with power wanted it to matter. And a handful of other times where I didn't even bother because I already knew how it would go. She looked at her hands. There was a valley in another country years ago, sir. Different mountain mountains, same story. I called a threat, got ignored, made a shot that saved a squad, and watched a lieutenant put his own initiative in the report and leave me out entirely. I had it all documented, I brought it forward, and a colonel I'd never met looked me in the eye and told me that stirring up trouble wouldn't help my career and that the lieutenant was a promising officer and I should let him have this one. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Let him have this one. Like the truth was a party favor I was being greedy about. Mitchell felt something turn over in his chest. What did you do? I let him have it, Emily said simply, because I was younger then, and I still believed that if I just kept my head down and did good work someday, the right person would notice. And you know what I learned, sir? The right person almost never notices. The system isn't built to notice the quiet ones. It's built to reward the loud ones who show up at the right moment and take the credit. And the quiet ones just keep saving lives in the dark and going home and writing the truth in a notebook nobody reads. She looked up at him. That's why I stopped needing the recognition. Not because I'm some kind of saint, because needing it was killing me and I chose to live instead. The room was silent, and Ryan Mitchell, 16 years an officer, understood that he was hearing something almost no one had ever heard. The private case of 15 years of being right and being erased. Well, he said finally, and his voice was thick, not this time, not on my base. This one you get to keep, Sergeant. I don't care what it costs me. Emily looked at him for a long moment. You keep saying that, sir, that you don't care what it costs you, but you haven't paid the bill yet. It's easy to be brave at 9 o'clock at night in a quiet office. Tomorrow morning when this goes up the chain and it's your name on a report that makes command staff and the intelligence shop look negligent, and somebody with a star on his shoulder asks you if you're really sure you want to make this an issue. She held his gaze. That's when we find out what you actually mean. Before Mitchell could answer, the door opened and Reed came back in, and his face was grim and triumphant all at once. He set a printout on the desk. Got him, he said. Mitchell and Emily both leaned in. The file was accessed and modified at 6:41 this evening, Reed said, from a terminal in the intelligence section. And the user account that did it, he tapped the printout, belongs to Warrant Officer Daniel Boyle. Mitchell frowned. Boyle, the intelligence analyst, he's the one who wrote the original assessment, the No Confirmed Danger report. That's right, Reed said. The very report that said the Eastern Ridge was clean. The report that Carter's assessment directly contradicted. So think about it, Captain. If your honest write-up goes up the chain with Carter's name and her prediction attached, what does that make Boyle's intelligence report look like? Wrong, Mitchell said slowly. Dangerously wrong. It makes it look like the intelligence shop missed a prepared enemy position that a designated marksman spotted from satellite photos in her off hours. And Boyle knew it, Reed said. The second our debrief let out and word got around that you were writing the truth, he understood that Carter's assessment was the thing that hung him. So he went into the files and he gutted it. Not to protect you, sir, to protect himself. Because as long as her assessment just says general concerns, then his No Confirmed Danger report looks like a reasonable call that got unlucky instead of a catastrophic miss that a sergeant caught and he didn't. Emily let out a slow breath, and something in her face was almost sad. So it wasn't even about me, she said quietly. It's never about me. I'm just the inconvenient truth standing between somebody and their clean record. She shook her head. 15 years and it's always the same. I predict the danger, I stop the danger, and then I become the danger. To whoever looks bad for not seeing what I saw. Not this time, Mitchell said again, and this time there was steel in it. He turned to Reed. You've got the access logs, Boyle's account, the timestamp, the modification, and we've got Carter's original notebook to prove what the assessment actually said before he gutted it. Put those two things side by side, and it's not a suspicion anymore. It's documented tampering with an official record to cover an intelligence failure. He straightened. That's not a career problem for me, gentlemen. That's a court-martial problem. For Boyle. But Emily held up a hand. Slow down, sir. I've seen this part go wrong, too. She leaned forward. You've got Boyle. That's real. But Boyle's a warrant officer, a mid-level analyst. Ask yourself, sir, would a mid-level analyst really take the risk of tampering with an official record on his own purely to save his own reputation on one report? That's a huge gamble for a man that far down the chain. Court-martial territory, like you said. She looked between them. So who was he protecting? Because in my experience, the person who does the erasing is almost never the person who benefits most from it. Boyle's account did the deed. But somebody's report is a whole lot cleaner if the Eastern Ridge stays no confirmed danger. Somebody above Boyle signed off on that intelligence. Somebody approved sending a patrol into that valley without clearing the high ground. Her eyes were steady. Boyle's the hand, sir. I want to know whose voice was in his ear. For a moment, nobody spoke, and Mitchell felt the floor shift under him because she was right, and he could feel the shape of something much larger than one nervous analyst hiding behind the altered file. You think this goes higher, he said. I think, Emily said carefully, that a warrant officer doesn't gut an official record 2 hours after a debrief unless somebody made him understand real fast exactly how much trouble everybody was in if that record went up intact. And I think that somebody has a rank that makes Boyle a lot more afraid of them than he is of a court-martial. She closed her notebook. So before we go charging up the chain, waving Boyle's name around, I want to know one thing. When Boyle sat down at that terminal at 6:41, was it his idea, or was he following orders? Reed and Mitchell looked at each other. There's one way to find out, Reed said slowly. We ask him. Tonight, before he knows we're on to him. Before he has time to talk to whoever he answers to and get his story straight. And we do it careful, Emily added, Because if we come at him like we've already caught him, he lawyers up and goes silent and protects whoever's above him because that person can end his career and we can't. But if we come at him like we're giving him a chance, a cold light came into her eyes. A scared man will hand you his boss to save himself. Every time, all you have to do is make him more afraid of the truth than he is of the person who told him to hide it. Mitchell looked at her. This sergeant he tried to disarm that very morning, now sitting in his office at 10 o'clock at night, calmly diagramming exactly how to unravel a cover-up that reached above both their heads, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just respect, something closer to awe. "You'd have made one hell of an intelligence officer, Sergeant," he said quietly. "No, sir," Emily said, and for the first time all day, there was the faintest ghost of humor in it. "I'd have made a terrible one. Intelligence officers have to be believed. I gave up on being believed a long time ago. I just kept a notebook instead." She stood and she tucked the notebook back into her jacket over her heart. "Now, let's go talk to Warrant Officer Boyle, and let's find out how far up this thing really goes. Because I've been erased a lot of times in 15 years, sir. But I've got a feeling that this is the first time I've ever had the proof and the witnesses and an officer willing to walk it up the chain all at the same time." Her eyes were steady and cold and certain. And if that's true, then somebody a lot more important than Boyle is about to have a very bad morning. She walked to the door and she stopped, and she looked back at the two men who for the first time in her long and lonely career had chosen to stand with her instead of over her. "You coming gentlemen," she said. "The shot this morning saved 12 men. But this tonight, this is the shot that decides whether the truth survives. And I don't intend to miss." Reed found him at 9 that night, and the look on the old sergeant's face told Mitchell everything before a word was spoken. "It's gone," Reed said. Mitchell's stomach dropped. "What do you mean gone?" "Carter's assessment, the one she filed 3 days ago. The physical copy's not in the tactical files where it should be." Reed stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "And when I pulled the digital record to make a backup like you asked, the thing had already been touched." Mitchell came around the desk. "Touched how?" Reed set a printout down and pointed at a line near the bottom. "Look at the modification timestamp. Somebody accessed that file at 6:41 this evening, right after our debrief let out. And they didn't just read it, Captain. They edited it." His jaw was tight. "The specifics are gone. The eastern ridge, the fold in the rock, the prediction of a prepared mortar position. All of it stripped out. What's left just says she noted general concerns about the sector." General concerns, vague enough to mean nothing. Vague enough that when your report goes up tomorrow with her name on it, there's nothing on file to back up a single word of her story. Mitchell sat down slowly, and Emily's words from that afternoon came back to him with a chill that ran the length of his spine. Uncomfortable questions have a way of disappearing between the desk they're written on and the desk they're supposed to reach. "She told me," he said quietly. "She stood right there this afternoon and told me to get that document in my hands tonight. She told me in almost these exact words that it would happen." He looked up. "How did she know, Reed? How does she keep seeing these things before they happen?" "Because she's lived inside this exact story her whole career," Reed said. "This isn't the first time somebody's tried to erase her. She told you that herself right here in this room. The only thing that's different this time is that somebody actually listened to her." He picked the printout back up. "But listening doesn't fix it, Captain. In 11 hours, that report goes up the chain, and right now, the one document that proves the honest part of it has been gutted. So we've got a problem, and we've got it tonight." Mitchell stood. "Get Carter, now." Emily arrived within 10 minutes, still in her fatigues, that rifle nowhere in sight now, but something harder in its place. When Reed laid it out for her, the altered file, the 6:41 timestamp, the gutted assessment, she didn't look surprised. She didn't look angry. She just nodded slow and quiet the way a person nods when the thing they've been bracing for their whole life finally walks through the door. "There it is," she said softly. "You're not even surprised," Mitchell said. "No, sir, I'm not." She pulled out a chair and sat calm as still water in a room that felt like it was starting to boil. "I told you this afternoon there are two battles in every story like mine. The first one's the shot. The shot is easy. The shot is wind and elevation and 10,000 hours of practice. Physics doesn't lie, and physics doesn't have a reputation to protect. She folded her hands. The second battle is this one, the paperwork, the record, and this is the one I've lost every single time for 15 years. Because the men who fight this battle don't need to be good shots. They just need to be patient and quiet and willing to change a few words in a file at 6:41 in the evening when they think nobody's watching. Well, somebody was watching, Mitchell said, and there was heat rising in his voice. And I want to fight about it. Emily looked at him, and something almost like warmth moved across her face, quickly hidden. I know you do, sir, and I want you to understand something. That's already more than I've ever had. 15 years and you're the first officer who's ever gotten angry on my behalf instead of at me. She let that sit for a second. But wanting to fight isn't the same as being able to win. And right now, sir, we can't win. Not with what we've got. All we have is a suspicion and an altered file. And an altered file with no original to hold it up against is just your word against theirs. And theirs, Captain, is the intelligence shop and command staff. Yours is one captain who already looks bad in this story for ignoring a warning. She shook her head slowly. We take this up the chain right now with what's on this desk and we lose. And worse than losing, we tip them off that we know. And then they close every door before we even find the handle. Reed leaned forward, his forearms on his knees. So what do we do? And here, for the first time all night, a small, cold smile touched the corner of Emily's mouth. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had been erased so many times that she'd finally painfully learned the trick of surviving it. We use the one thing they never think about, she said. The one thing that saved me every single time I was smart enough to remember it. She looked from Reed to Mitchell and back. They think there's only one copy. There's always only one copy in their minds. One file, one record, one version of the truth that they get to control. Her voice was very quiet. But I never filed just one copy. Not for 15 years. Mitchell went still. What? 15 years, Captain, Emily said. 15 years of watching my work get buried, edited, credited to somebody else or lost. You think I didn't learn? The first few times it broke my heart clean in half. But somewhere around year 5, I stopped crying about it and I got smart. She reached into her pocket and drew out a small, worn notebook. Its cover soft and darkened from being carried against her body for a very long time. She set it on the desk between them like it weighed 100 pounds. Every assessment I file, every warning I write, every prediction I make, I keep a second copy in my own hand, dated the day I wrote it. Somewhere no clerk, no analyst, and no officer can ever reach in and change it. Reed stared at the notebook. That's paper. That's the point, Emily said. Paper doesn't have a modification timestamp somebody can quietly edit at 6:41 on a Tuesday. Paper doesn't sit in a shared drive with a dozen people's fingerprints on it. Paper just says what it said the day the ink went down, and it keeps saying it forever, no matter how badly somebody wishes it said something else. She opened the notebook to a page marked with a carefully folded corner, and she turned it around so both men could see. And there it was in her own small, precise handwriting, dated 3 days ago. The eastern ridge, the fold in the rock, the prediction of a prepared enemy mortar position, the estimated range of Boyne, the danger to any patrol moving through the valley below. The exact assessment she'd stood up and presented in that briefing room, whole and untouched, in real written down in ink the same day she'd first seen it in the satellite images. Mitchell reached out and touched the edge of the page like he couldn't quite believe it was solid. That's the truth, sir, Molly said. In my own hand, dated the day I saw it. And that's not even all of it. She turned the page. I don't just keep my assessments, I keep everything. When you dismissed that assessment 3 days ago in the briefing room, I wrote that down too. Who was in the room? What was said? The exact words. She glanced up and there was no cruelty in her eyes, only a steady honesty. Including the part where you called it a hunch, sir. I'm sorry that it's in there, but it's the truth, and I don't edit my own record, even when the truth is uncomfortable for a man I've started to respect. Mitchell let out a short, stunned breath that was almost a laugh. You've got me. In writing, dated 3 days ago, admitting I ignored you. He shook his head slowly. Sergeant, do you understand what you're holding? I understand exactly what I'm holding, sir, she said quietly. I've been holding it for 15 years. This is just the first time anybody in a position to matter has ever asked to see it." The room went silent, and Reed, 30 years a soldier, a man who thought he'd seen every kind of courage the Army had to offer, looked at that worn notebook and then at the woman who'd carried it, and he shook his head with something close to reverence. 15 years, he said, his voice rough. You've been keeping a shadow record of your own life for 15 years because you knew someday somebody would try exactly this. Not new, Marcus, Emily corrected gently. Just learned the hard way. Enough times that I stopped being surprised when it happened. She looked down at the notebook, and for just a moment the mask slipped, and what was underneath was so lonely that both men had to look away. You want to know the loneliest thing in the whole world? It's keeping proof of your own worth in a book that not one living soul has ever asked to read. 15 years of writing down the truth about myself, careful and dated and complete, just in case. And never once in all that time having anyone who cared enough to open it. She raised her eyes and they landed on Mitchell. This is the first time. In 15 years, sir, this is the first time anyone with the power to do something has wanted the truth badly enough to ask me for it. So thank you. I mean that. You have no idea what it's worth to me to finally set this book down in front of someone who actually wants to read it. Something moved in Mitchell's chest, and he had to clear his throat before he could speak. All right, he said, and his voice was thicker than he wanted it to be. So we've got proof, your notebook. Dated in your hand, matching the assessment they gutted word for word. He straightened, forcing the officer back into place over the man. But I've been at this long enough to see the hole in it, Sergeant. Your notebook is your record. Their file is the official record, and it's been changed to say something else. Put those two things in front of your review board, and what do they see? Your word against the system's. A defense would call that a wash. Worse, they'd call it a soldier who was passed over and decided to write herself a better story after the fact. That's exactly what they'd call it, Emily agreed, which is why the notebook alone isn't enough. It proves what I said. It doesn't prove that they changed it. We need both, sir. We need to prove not just that a truer version exists, but that somebody reached into that file and gutted it on purpose. We need to catch the hand that did it. And here Reed stood up, and there was a hard, cold glint in his old eyes that neither of them had seen before. I can do that, he said. Both of them turned. The file was altered, Reed said, but this base runs on a network, and a network keeps logs. Every file, every access, every edit leaves a footprint, a user account, a terminal, a timestamp down to the second. He tapped the desk. Whoever went into that document at 6:41 tonight, they were smart enough to change the words, but I'd bet my pension they weren't smart enough to think about the logs. Nobody ever thinks about the logs, because when you're sitting there editing a file, it never once crosses your mind that the system is standing right behind you, writing down everything you do. He moved toward the door. Give me an hour, Captain. Maybe less. I've been pulling access records off this base for 20 years back, when it was all paper, and I had to do it by hand. If somebody touched that file, the system knows who, and in an hour, so will I. Do it, Mitchell said, and Reed quietly. Nobody knows we're looking. Nobody ever knows when I'm looking, Reed said, and he was gone. The hour that followed was one of the longest of Ryan Mitchell's life. He and Emily sat in the office with the notebook on the desk between them, and for a while neither of them spoke, the only sound the low hum of the building settling into night. Then quietly Mitchell said the thing that had been sitting on his chest since Reed walked out. Can I ask you something, Sergeant? An honest question. And I want an honest answer, even if it's a hard one. Those are the only kind I give, sir. He turned the notebook a few degrees on the desk, not really looking at it. If Reed hadn't caught the altered file tonight, if I'd sent that report up tomorrow morning the way I wrote it, honest, your name in it, your prediction spelled out, and then somebody up the chain pulled the tactical files to check and found nothing but general concerns about the sector. He raised his eyes to hers. You'd have looked like a liar, or I'd have looked like I was covering for you. The whole thing would have collapsed under its own weight, and you'd have had to sit there and watch it happen, knowing exactly how it was done and being able to prove nothing. He paused. How many times, Sergeant, how many times has that happened to you, where you had the truth and it didn't matter because someone with more rank made sure it didn't? Emily was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally answered, her voice was perfectly steady, which was somehow far worse than if it had broken. Twice that I fought, she said. Twice I had the proof in my hands and brought it forward and watched it die anyway because nobody with power wanted it to live. And a handful of other times where I didn't even try because I already knew exactly how the story ended and I couldn't stomach living through it again. She looked at her hands folded in her lap. There was a valley in another country, sir, years ago. Different mountains, same story to the letter. I read the ground I called a hidden threat. I got told there was no confirmed danger. And then I made a shot that saved 8 men from an ambush that would have wiped them out. I had it all documented even then. This same habit. And when the report came out, a lieutenant had written his own quick thinking into it, and my part was one line. The designated marksman engaged the target. That phrase. That exact phrase, sir, I've been reading it my whole career. Mitchell felt something turn over hard in his chest because he had used that exact phrase in the debrief that very afternoon. What did you do? He asked quietly. I brought my documentation to a colonel, Emily said. A man I'd never met who'd never seen me shoot, who knew nothing about me except that I was making trouble on a day he wanted to be quiet. And he looked at my proof and he looked at me and he told me that stirring up trouble wouldn't help my career. That the lieutenant was a promising young officer with a bright future and that I should, and I'll never forget the words, sir, I should let him have this one. Her jaw tightened just barely. Let him have this one. Like the truth about who saved 8 lives was a party favor, and I was being greedy for wanting to keep it. And you let him, Mitchell said. It wasn't a question. I let him, Emily said simply, because I was younger then, and I still believed that if I just kept my head down and did the work and stayed patient, then one day the right person would notice. That the system was slow but fair, and it would get around to me eventually. She looked up, and her eyes were clear and dry and terribly calm. And you want to know what 15 years taught me, sir, the right person almost never notices. The system isn't built to notice the quiet ones. It's built to reward the loud ones who show up at the exact right moment and put their hand up and take the credit. The quiet ones just keep reading the ground and calling the threats and making the shots and going home and writing the truth in a notebook that nobody reads. And that's the whole arrangement. That's the deal nobody tells you about when you enlist. The office was silent. And Ryan Mitchell, 16 years an officer, a man who had built his entire identity on his judgment, understood that he was hearing something almost no one had ever been trusted to hear. The real private cost of 15 years of being right and being erased in the same breath. So that's why, he said slowly, this afternoon when you told me you'd stop needing the recognition. That it wasn't strength, it was just what was left after the anger burned off. He shook his head. That's not peace, Sergeant. That's a wound you learn to stop bleeding from. Emily looked at him with something like surprise, as though she hadn't expected him to understand it that well. Yes, sir, she said quietly. I suppose it is. Well, Mitchell said, and his voice had gone rough and low and certain. Not this time, not on my base, not under my name. This one you get to keep, Sergeant. I don't care what it costs me, and I mean that all the way down. Emily studied him for a long moment, and then she said the thing she'd been holding back, gentle but unflinching. You keep saying that, sir, that you don't care what it costs you, but you haven't actually paid anything yet. She held his gaze steadily. It's easy to be brave at 9 o'clock at night in a quiet office with 2 people who already agree with you. Tomorrow morning is different. Tomorrow morning this goes up the chain, and it's your name on a report that makes command staff in the intelligence shop look negligent. And somewhere up that chain, a man with a star on his shoulder is going to look at you and ask real friendly whether you're absolutely sure you want to make this an issue, whether it's really worth it, whether one sergeant's name on a report is worth all the trouble it's going to bring down. Her voice was quiet and clear. That's when we find out what you actually mean, Captain. Not tonight. Then. Before Mitchell could answer, the door opened and Reed came back in, and the look on his face was grim and fierce and triumphant all at once. He crossed the room in 3 strides and laid a printout on the desk on top of the notebook. Got him, he said. Mitchell and Emily both leaned in. The file was accessed and modified at 6:41 this evening, exactly like the timestamp showed, Reed said, his finger moving down the page. From a terminal in the intelligence section, 2nd floor east side, and the user account that logged in and made the change. He tapped a name. Warrant Officer Daniel Boyle. Mitchell frowned, the name landing. Boyle, the analyst, he's the one who wrote the original intelligence report, the no confirmed hostile activity assessment. The very same, Reed said. The report that swore up and down that the Eastern Ridge was clean. The exact report that Carter's assessment tore a hole straight through. He straightened. So walk it through with me, Captain. If your honest write-up goes up the chain tomorrow with Carter's name and her prediction attached, spelled out dated 3 days early, what does that do to Boyle's intelligence report? Mitchell's face darkened as he saw it. It makes it look wrong, not just wrong, negligent. It makes it look like the intelligence shop completely missed a prepared enemy firing position that a marksman spotted in her spare time off a stack of satellite photos nobody asked her to study. And Boyle knew it, Reed said. The second our debrief let out and word got around the base that you were writing the truth this time, that Carter's name was going in the report, he understood exactly what that meant for him. Her assessment is the thing that hangs him. So he waited until the building went quiet and he walked up to that terminal and he gutted it. Not to protect you, Captain, to save his own skin, because as long as her assessment just says general concerns, then his no confirmed danger report looks like a reasonable call that got a little unlucky. But the moment her real assessment surfaces, his report looks like the worst kind of failure, the kind that gets men killed. Emily let out a slow, long breath, and something in her face was almost sad, and almost tender, the look of a person recognizing an old familiar face in a crowd. So it wasn't even about me, she said softly. It's never about me. That's the part that took me years to understand, sir. I'm not the target. I'm just the inconvenient truth that happens to be standing between somebody and their clean record. Boyle doesn't hate me. Boyle's probably never thought about me for more than 5 minutes in his life. He just needed my assessment to say something it didn't say so his own mistake would look survivable. She shook her head slowly. 15 years and it's always the exact same shape. I read the danger. I stopped the danger. And then the moment the shooting's over, I become the danger. Not to the enemy, to whoever looks bad for not seeing what I saw. Not this time, Mitchell said, and the steel was full in his voice now. He turned to Reed. You've got Boyle's account, the timestamp, the terminal, the modification all logged, and we've got Carter's original notebook to prove exactly what that assessment said before he took a knife to it. Put those two things side by side and it stops being a suspicion. It's documented tampering with an official record to cover an intelligence failure. He set his jaw. That's not a career problem for me, gentlemen. That's a court-martial. For Boyle. But Emily held up a single hand, came up uncertain and stopped him cold. Slow down, sir. I've watched this exact part go wrong before and I don't want to watch it again. She leaned forward, her forearms on the desk, and her voice dropped into something quieter and sharper. You've got Boyle dead to rights. That's real. But think about who Boyle is for a second. He's a warrant officer, a mid-level analyst, a man with a pension coming and a family most likely, and a whole lot to lose. She looked between the two of them. Now ask yourself honestly, would a man like that with that much on the line really walk up to a terminal on his own and tamper with an official record, a court-martial offense, just to save his own reputation on one intelligence report, on his own initiative? That's an enormous risk for a man that far down the chain to take alone. The room went very quiet. So who was he protecting, Emily said. Because in 15 years of watching this happen, I've learned one thing that never changes. The person who does the erasing is almost never the person who benefits the most from it. Boyle's account made the edit. Boyle's fingerprints are on the keyboard. But somebody's report is a whole lot cleaner if the Eastern Ridge stays no confirmed danger. Somebody above Boyle put their signature on that intelligence and blessed it. Somebody approved sending 12 men into that valley without clearing the high ground first. Her eyes moved between them, steady and cold. Boyle's the hand, sir. I want to know whose voice was in his ear when that hand reached for the keyboard. For a long moment, nobody spoke, and Mitchell felt the floor shift beneath him because she was right. She was right again, the way she'd been right about the ridge and right about the altered file, and he could suddenly feel the shape of something much larger and colder than one frightened analyst hiding behind a changed word. You think this goes higher, he said. I think, Emily said carefully, that a warrant officer does not commit a court-martial offense 2 hours after a debrief unless somebody made him understand very fast and very clearly exactly how much trouble everybody was going to be in if that record went up the chain intact. And I think that somebody has enough rank that Boyle is a great deal more afraid of them than he is of a court-martial. She closed the access log printout and set it gently on top of her notebook. So before we go charging up the chain tomorrow, waving Boyle's name around like a trophy, I want to know one thing, and it's the only thing that matters right now. When Boyle sat down at that terminal at 6:41 and started deleting my words, was it his idea? Or was he following an order? Reed and Mitchell looked at each other across the desk, and the same understanding passed between them. There's one way to find out, Reed said slowly. We ask him. Tonight. Right now, before he has any idea we're onto him. Before he gets a chance to call whoever he answers to and get his story lined up straight. And we do it careful, Emily added immediately, because this is where it lives or dies, gentlemen. If we come at Boyle like we've already got him nailed to the wall, he panics, he goes silent, he lawyers up, and he protects whoever's above him, because that person can end his career and we can't. He'll take the fall himself before he gives up a man with a star. She tapped the desk. But if we come at him like we're handing him a lifeline, like we already know he didn't do this alone, and we're giving him one chance to be the witness instead of the defendant. A cold light came into her eyes. A scared man will hand you his boss to save himself. Every single time, all you have to do is make him more afraid of the truth than he is of the person who told him to bury it. Mitchell stared at her. This sergeant he had ordered his men to disarm not 16 hours earlier, now sitting in his office at 10:30 at night, calmly and precisely laying out how to crack open a cover-up that reached above both their heads, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not just respect, something closer to awe. You'd have made one hell of an intelligence officer, Sergeant, he said quietly. No, sir. And for the first time all night, the faintest ghost of dry humor touched the corner of her mouth. I'd have made a terrible one. Intelligence officers have to be believed to do their jobs. I gave up on being believed a long time ago. I just kept a notebook instead. She stood and she picked up the worn book and slid it back into her jacket over her heart, where it had ridden for 15 years. Now, let's go have a conversation with Warrant Officer Boyle, and let's find out how far up this thing really climbs. Because I've been erased more times than I can count, sir. But I've got a feeling this is the first time in my whole career that I've had the proof and the witnesses and an officer willing to walk it all the way up the chain, standing in the same room at the same time. She moved to the door and she stopped there, one hand on the frame, and she looked back at the two men who, for the first time in her long and lonely career, had chosen to stand beside her instead of over her. You coming, gentlemen, she said. The shot this morning saved 12 lives. But this tonight, this is the one that decides whether the truth survives the night. And after 15 years of watching it die. Her eyes were steady and cold and absolutely certain. I don't intend to miss. Boyle opened his door in a rumpled t-shirt, and the moment he saw the three of them standing there, Captain Senior Sergeant and the marksman from the valley, the color drained out of his face so fast that Emily knew right then that everything she'd guessed was true. Captain Mitchell, Boyle said, and his voice cracked on the second word. It's late. Is there something I can help you with? Can we come in, Warrant Officer? Mitchell said. It wasn't really a question. They came in. Boyle stood in the middle of his small quarters with his arms half-crossed, trying to look casual and failing at every level a man can fail. His eyes kept darting to Emily, then away, then back, like she was a fire he couldn't stop looking at. We won't take much of your time, Mitchell said, settling into a chair without being offered one. I just wanted to talk to you about the tactical files, the Black Canyon assessment, Sergeant Carter specifically. Boyle swallowed. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I handle the intelligence products. I don't really touch the field assessments. That's a different 6:41 this evening, Reed said quietly. Your account, your terminal second floor east side. You opened Sergeant Carter's assessment and you edited it, took out the eastern ridge, took out the fold in the rock, took out the mortar prediction, left it saying general concerns about the sector. He let it land. The system logged all of it, son. Every keystroke has your name on it. And there it was, the moment. Emily watched it happen across Boyle's face the way she'd watched 100 things happen through a scope, the slow collapse of a man who's just realized the ground he's standing on isn't there. His mouth opened, closed. His eyes went wet at the corners. He started. Before you say anything, Emily said, and she stepped forward, and her voice was not hard. That was the thing that undid him. It was gentle. I want you to understand something, warrant officer. We already know you did it. That's not in question anymore. So the only decision left to you tonight isn't whether you get caught. That's already done. The only decision is what kind of man walks out of this room in the morning. Boyle stared at her. You changed my file, she went on, quiet and steady. You tried to erase the one piece of paper that proved I saw it coming. And I'll be honest with you, 12 hours ago, I'd have wanted to put you through a wall for it. A pause was. But I've been doing this a long time, Boyle. Long enough to know something about the men who do what you did tonight. She held his eyes. They're almost never the ones who wanted to. Somebody makes them. Somebody with more rank and more to lose leans on a mid-level guy with a family and a pension and says real quiet, fix this or we both go down and guess which one of us the army protects. She tilted her head. Is that about right? Boyle's chin trembled, and that was the answer before he ever said a word. Sit down, son, Reed said, not unkindly, before you fall down. Boyle sat on the edge of his bunk, and he put his face in his hands, and for a long moment, nobody pushed him. Emily had learned that too over 15 years. When a man is standing at the edge of the truth, you don't shove him. You just wait, and you let the silence do the work. Because the truth is heavier to hold than to set down, and eventually every man gets tired of holding it. I've got 2 kids, Boyle finally said into his hands. 11 years in. 4 to go till I'm vested. He looked up and his eyes were red. He came to me right after the debrief, told me your report was going up in the morning with her name in it and her predictions spelled out. Said that made my intelligence assessment look like criminal negligence. Said an investigation would find that he approved sending that patrol into the valley without clearing the high ground over a documented warning. His voice broke. He said, Danny, if that assessment goes up the way it is, they'll hang both of us. You're the one with system access. You know what needs to happen. Fix it, and this stays a bad luck story instead of the end of 2 careers. Mitchell leaned forward. Who, Boyle? Give me the name. Boyle hesitated, and Emily saw the old fear flare in him, the fear of the man above him, and she spoke before it could take hold. He told you the army would protect him, and not you, she said quietly. That's why you did it. Because you believed him. Because that's how it's always worked, isn't it? The rank protects the rank, and the guy at the terminal takes the fall. She crouched down so she was level with him, so he had to look at her. I've watched that math play out for 15 years, Boyle. I've been the person it got done to over and over. So let me tell you something you need to hear right now at 10:30 at night before you make the worst decision of your life. Her voice was steady as stone. That math only holds if the guy at the terminal stays quiet. The second you talk, the second you become the witness instead of the accomplice, everything flips. Because now you're the man who came forward, and he's the man who ordered a cover-up and let a subordinate hang for it. She held his gaze. So who was it, Danny, whose voice was in your ear? The room was dead silent, and then in a voice barely above a whisper, Boyle said it. Major Hollis. Mitchell went still. Reed exhaled slowly, and Emily closed her eyes for just a second because it was worse than she'd hoped and exactly what she'd feared. Major Hollis, the operations officer, the man who had signed off on the Black Canyon mission, the man 3 full ranks above Boyle and 2 above Mitchell, whose name on the approval meant that the decision to send 12 men into that valley without clearing the ridge had come from high enough up to bury almost anyone. You're sure, Mitchell said quietly. He was standing right where you're sitting, sir, Boyle said. 2 hours ago, he told me exactly what to change, and he watched me write down which file to open. And when I hesitated, he told me my kids would understand someday why their dad had to make a hard call. He wiped his face roughly. I've hated myself since the second he walked out. I've been sitting here all night trying to figure out how to undo it, and I couldn't see a way. There's no way. He outranks everybody who'd care. And here, Emily stood up and she reached into her jacket and she set her worn notebook on the bunk beside him. Boyle stared at it. What's this? That, Emily said, is the way. That's the original assessment in my hand dated 3 days ago. Every word you deleted still alive right here. Hollis thinks he won tonight because he thinks the only copy of the truth was the one he made you destroy. She almost smiled. He never once imagined I'd been keeping my own record for 15 years because it never occurred to him that anyone would have to. That's the thing about men like Hollis Boyle. They can't conceive of a person who's been erased so many times that she started writing herself down just to prove she existed. Boyle looked at the notebook, then at her, and something moved across his face that was almost hope. So it's not gone. Any of it. None of it's gone, Emily said. It was never in his file to begin with. It was always in mine. She picked the notebook back up. Now, Reed's got your access logs proving the file was altered. I've got the original proving what it said. And you. She looked at him steadily. You've got the one thing neither of us has. You were in the room. You heard Hollis give the order in his own words, standing right there. You're not the villain in this story, Boyle. You're the witness, if you have the guts to be one. Boyle was quiet for a long, long moment, and then he looked up at Mitchell, and his voice was steadier than it had been all night. What do you need me to do, sir? They worked until nearly 2 a.m. Boyle wrote a statement, everything Hollis had said, timed and dated. Reed printed the access logs and locked a copy in 3 separate places because Emily insisted, because Emily always insisted, because 15 years had taught her that one copy was how the truth died. In Emily's notebook was photographed page by page, the original assessment set beside the gutted file so that anyone with eyes could see exactly what had been taken out and exactly who had taken it. And at the center of it all sat Ryan Mitchell, quietly assembling the report that would go up the chain at 8 a.m. The honest one, the one with Emily's name in it, but now it carried something more than one sergeant's recognition. It carried the whole machinery of the cover-up laid bare from the analyst's keyboard all the way up to the major's order. Around 1, Mitchell set down his pen and looked at Emily across the small room. You understand what this is now, he said. This stopped being about your name in a report hours ago. This is a major and operations officer going down for tampering and for approving a mission that nearly got 12 men killed. This is going to shake this whole base. There'll be an investigation that reaches places I can't even see from where I sit. He rubbed his eyes. And when they ask who started pulling this thread, it's going to be my name. A captain who took down a major. He almost laughed. That's not a thing that happens quietly, Sergeant. That's a thing that follows a man the rest of his career. Emily studied him. Second thoughts, sir. And this was the moment she'd warned him about hours ago in his office. The moment the bill came due. The moment they found out what he actually meant. Mitchell was quiet. Then he picked his pen back up. No, sir, he said. No second thoughts. He signed the bottom of the report. You asked me tonight what I actually meant when I said I didn't care what it meant. I've been sitting here for 3 hours finding out. He looked up at her. Turns out I meant it. First thing I've been certain of in 16 years that didn't almost get somebody killed. Emily looked at him for a long moment, and what she felt watching this proud, flawed man sign his own name to the thing that would cost him was something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. It wasn't vindication. It was something quieter and more dangerous than that. It was hope. For what it's worth, Captain, she said quietly, the man who almost buried my part in this yesterday afternoon and the man signing that report tonight are not the same man. You want to know the rarest thing I've seen in 15 years? It's not the shot. It's a person changing. Most people never manage it once. She nodded at the paper. You've done it twice in 2 days. First when you gave the order to fire. Now with that pen. A pause. That's harder than 1,800 meters, sir. A whole lot harder. The report went up at 8 o'clock the next morning, and Mitchell walked it up himself personally, hand to hand, exactly the way Emily had told him to, and he watched the receiving officer look him in the eye and take it, and there was no inbox for it to disappear from overnight, because Emily Carter never let the truth sleep somewhere. It could be edited. What followed came fast, the way these things do once the first stone moves. The investigation opened within days. Boyle's statement, the access logs, and Emily's notebook made the case airtight in a way that almost never happens, because the people who commit these quiet crimes count on there never being a clean record, and Emily had built her whole survival around being the exception to that rule. Major Hollis denied everything at first the way men like Hollis always do, right up until they showed him the timestamps and the analyst's sworn statement and the photographs of a 15-year-old handwriting habit that had outmaneuvered his entire cover-up in a single evening. And then Major Hollis stopped denying and started negotiating, and that was the sound of a career ending. He was relieved of his position within the month. The approval for the Black Canyon mission, the decision to send 12 soldiers into a valley without clearing the high ground over a documented warning, came out into the light where everyone could see it. And Boyle, who had come forward, who had chosen at 10:30 at night to be the witness instead of the accomplice, kept his pension and his family, and something he hadn't had in a long time, which was the ability to look at himself in the mirror. But the thing Emily remembered most in the years after wasn't the investigation or Hollis or the report. It was smaller than that. It was quieter. It was the morning 3 weeks in when the corrected record came down. Her name in full, Sergeant Emily Carter. The assessment she'd filed 3 days early restored word for word. The prediction, the warning, the shot, all of it in the official record in ink that no one could reach in and gut, because now the whole Army was watching this one. Reed found her reading it in the mess hall alone, a cup of coffee going cold beside her. 15 years, he said, sitting down across from her. How's it feel finally seeing your name on it? Emily was quiet for a moment, looking at the paper. You want the truth, Marcus, she said. It feels like a lot less than I thought it would. She almost smiled. For 15 years, I told myself I didn't need this, that I'd made peace with the notebook, with being the quiet one nobody read. And I meant it. I really did. She set the paper down. But I'll tell you what it actually feels like seeing my name there. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like being seen. And I forgot somewhere in all those years of telling myself I didn't need it, how much I missed just being seen. Reed nodded slowly, and he didn't say anything because some things don't need answering. He just sat with her the way he had that night at 2 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee, back when he was the only one who'd looked at her and wondered which kind of soldier she really was. The changes came slowly after that, and then all at once. The soldiers who had smirked at her that first morning started showing up at the range to watch her shoot and then to ask her how. Dawson, the young private who'd mocked her for fussing over her rifle, became the first to formally request training under her, and he wasn't the last. The things she did, the reading of the ground, the patient study, the second copy always filed, the refusal to be rushed, it stopped being the strange habit of the quiet one nobody trusted and started becoming quietly the way things were done at Fort Raven Ridge. And Mitchell. Mitchell paid his bill. There were hard questions asked about the captain who took down a major and some doors closed for him that might otherwise have opened, and he never once complained about it. Not to Emily, not to anyone. Because he'd learned the things she tried to teach him in that office at 9 o'clock at night. That certainty is the dangerous thing. And he'd rather be a captain who'd been certain about the truth and paid for it than a major who'd been comfortable inside a lie. Months later, another operation began in the same region. Another dangerous valley, another hidden threat, another moment where everything came down to whether someone could do the impossible. And in the briefing room, when the question came up, when they needed someone who could read the ground and make the shot that no one else could make, nobody at that table asked whether she could do it. Nobody looked at her and saw someone who didn't fit the picture. Nobody reached for the old easy doubt. They just turned to her, and they waited for her to tell them what she saw. That was the real victory, not the report, not Hollis, not even her name in the record, though God knew she'd earned it 100 times over. The real victory was that the quiet one nobody believed in had become the one they trusted first, before anyone raised a hand, before anyone said a word. The soldier they'd wanted to disarm on her very first morning had become the person the whole outpost turned to when everything depended on a single decision and a single breath and a single shot. And Sergeant Emily Carter, who had spent 15 years writing the truth in a notebook that no one ever asked to read, finally understood the thing it had taken her whole career to learn. That the world doesn't always give the quiet ones their due. That being right is not the same as being believed, and being believed is not the same as being seen. That sometimes the person who saves everyone is the one standing alone in the corner, holding a rifle, waiting for a world too proud and too certain to finally understand what they were capable of all along. But she also learned this, and it was the thing she carried with her from that day forward, steadier than any doubt and truer than any report. The world does not always come around, but sometimes if you refuse to disappear, if you keep doing the work in the dark and keep the truth alive when everyone else is trying to bury it, if you stand your ground with facts instead of anger, and never ever let them rush you into the wrong shot, the world comes around anyway. It came around for Emily Carter, and the soldier they once wanted to remove from the battlefield became the one name that every man at Fort Raven Ridge spoke with respect. The quiet marksman who proved at 1,840 meters, and in a report that no one could erase that true ability, is never decided by appearance or reputation, or the assumptions of small men in a hurry to judge. It is decided by what you do when everything is on the line. And when everything was on the line, Emily Carter never missed.